So, the story of the atomic bomb begins with the world's most famous pacifist, Albert Einstein. In 1939, fearing that a certain German leader with a terrible mustache was developing one, he signed a letter to President Roosevelt. The letter basically said, "Hey, you know that thing where you can turn matter into a city-destroying amount of energy? We should probably build that before the other guys do." It's a beautiful example of historical irony, like a vegan inventing the world's most efficient slaughterhouse, just in case. This kicked off the Manhattan Project, a $2 billion science experiment with the friendliest name for a project designed to vaporize people. By 1945, the bomb was ready, and Germany, the original motivation, had already surrendered. Awkward. So, America had this incredibly expensive, terrifying new toy and needed a place to use it. Enter the Target Committee. These gentlemen sat around a table with a list of Japanese cities and chose the targets with a chillingly scientific detachment. Their main criteria? The city had to be relatively untouched by conventional bombing so they could get a clear before and after picture. Yes, they needed a pristine laboratory to accurately measure the effects of obliterating a population center. Kyoto was on the list, but got saved, supposedly because Secretary of War Henry Stimson had a nice honeymoon there once. Nothing saves a city like a fond memory of pre-war tourism. Now, the common story is that Japan was determined to fight to the last man, woman, and child. And parts of the government certainly were. The military hardliners were essentially running a death cult. But the civilian government was desperately trying to find a way out. They were sending secret diplomatic signals to the Allies, mostly through the Soviet Union. This was a terrible plan, because Stalin was gleefully preparing to invade Japan to grab some territory. It's like asking the wolf to please negotiate with the farmer on behalf of the chickens. The one non-negotiable term for Japan was protecting their emperor, who they considered a living god, a detail the Allies would conveniently ignore. In July 1945, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration. It was an ultimatum demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. The key phrase was that the alternative was prompt and utter destruction. To the Japanese, this just sounded like more of the same firebombing they'd been enduring for months. There was zero mention of a new, sun-creating weapon. Crucially, it also said nothing about the fate of the emperor. Leaving this out was either a catastrophic diplomatic blunder or a calculated move to ensure the ultimatum would be rejected. The Japanese prime minister used the word mokusatsu in his public response, a term that can mean to ignore or to treat with silent contempt. The Allies chose the more insulting translation: a global conflict decided by a verb choice. Perfect. The primary justification you always hear is that the bombs saved lives, specifically 1 million American lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Japan. It's a powerful, comforting number. It's also not true. This figure wasn't produced until after the war, when leaders needed a solid justification. Before the bombing, the actual military estimates were all over the place, but the most influential one, from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, projected around 46,000 American deaths for the invasion of Kyushu. Still a horrific number, but it's not 1 million. The number was inflated for public consumption, turning a complex strategic decision into a simple, brutal arithmetic problem, where the bomb was the lesser of two evils. History is often just a story we tell ourselves later to feel better about the things we've done. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima. The city was chosen because it was a key military depot and, conveniently, had never been bombed. a clean slate. The crew reportedly had a smooth flight. Paul Tibbets, the pilot, said it was perfect. Below them, at 8:15 a.m., the world ended. The temperature at the hypocenter reached millions of degrees. People were vaporized, leaving only their shadows burned onto walls. It took hours for anyone in Tokyo to even figure out what had happened. All they knew was that Hiroshima had gone silent. One city, one bomb, and a level of destruction that was literally incomprehensible at the time. The day after Hiroshima, President Truman called it the greatest thing in history. The Japanese military, meanwhile, was still debating if it was even a nuclear weapon. Some of their top scientists argued it was impossible. But while they were arguing, something far more terrifying happened from their perspective. On August 9th, the Soviet Union, their last hope for a negotiated peace, declared war and stormed into Manchuria with over 1 million troops. For many in the Japanese high command, this was the real death blow. An atomic bomb is a horrifying singular event, but a Soviet invasion meant the complete dismemberment of the empire and the spread of communism. They had 2 apocalypses to choose from. The strategic chessboard had just been flipped over and set on fire. With the Soviets invading and Japan's government in paralysis, the U.S. decided to drop the second bomb, also on August 9th. Why so fast? Some argue it was to shock Japan into surrendering immediately. Others suggest it was to send a message to the Soviets, a lovely little preview of the Cold War. The mission to drop Fat Man was a comedy of errors. The primary target, Kokura, was obscured by clouds. After circling and running low on fuel, the crew diverted to their secondary target, Nagasaki. A city was annihilated because of bad weather over another city. The bomb was even dropped off target, which ironically saved part of the city by containing the blast within a valley. A minor miracle in the middle of a man-made hell. After the second bomb and the Soviet invasion, Emperor Hirohito finally intervened. Against the wishes of his military leaders, who staged a failed coup to stop him, he recorded a surrender speech. The recording had to be smuggled out of the palace past rogue soldiers. On August 15th, the Japanese people heard their emperor's voice for the very first time, crackling over the radio. It was called the Jewel Voice broadcast. In his speech, delivered in archaic courtly Japanese that most people couldn't fully understand, he never used the word surrender. He said the war had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and they must endure the unendurable. The greatest understatement in human history, used to end the deadliest war in human history. With the war over, the justification began, the narrative that the bombs were a necessary evil that saved 1 million lives was crafted and promoted heavily by the U.S. government. Secretary of War Henry Stimson published an influential article in Harper's Magazine in 1947 titled "The Decision to Use the Atomic Bomb." It masterfully laid out the case, cementing the official story in the public mind. It left out the Soviet invasion, the peace feelers, the internal debates, and the lower casualty estimates. It presented a clean, simple choice between bomb or invasion. This wasn't necessarily a lie, but it was a spectacular oversimplification. And that, right there, is how history is made, not by what happened, but by the story that gets told the loudest. So, was it the right call? The question is almost impossible to answer because it's the wrong question. It wasn't one decision, but a cascade of them, made by flawed people under immense pressure with incomplete information. The bombs certainly played a role in the surrender, but they weren't the silver bullet the official story claims. The Soviet invasion was arguably just as, if not more, decisive. The moral controversy exists because the simple justification falls apart under scrutiny. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that in war, choices aren't between good and bad, they're between terrible and somehow even worse. The atomic age didn't begin with a heroic act or a villainous one. It began with a deeply, tragically human one. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!